Just saying hi and welcome, everyone. This talk has been on my mind for a really long time, and I'm a choreographer, a dance artist, and I've organized this around my current project. And I want this work to be more about hope rather than fear. And this is why I'm turning to you, Judith. Judith is going to lead our talk, and she's a jungian psychotherapist with a long interest in mental health and emotional implications of climate change, as you probably have gathered already. She has been a member of Climate Psychology Alliance since its founding and currently is its chair. And I really recommend you visiting Climate Psychology Alliance website if you haven't yet. There's a lot of interesting resource there. So yeah, Judith, without further ado, over to you. Thank you.
And I'm sorry that I missed the niceties of the introduction. I guess it's sort of indicative of how full up we can all be about the state of things, and I will try and find some hope or a way of looking at hope. So I first became interested in climate change seriously probably about 15 years ago, and I was part of an organization called Psychotherapists and Counselors for Social Responsibility, and we decided to have a conference on climate change, which was called Making the Sea Change. And we invited a Jungian art therapist, and I'm just going to put her name in the chat because there's lots of resources on her website, Mary Jane Rust, and you can still see that talk, Making the Sea Change. And I think talking to Mary Jane and listening to her talk really woke me up that this was the defining issue for our time. Of course, related to many other issues, related to social justice issues, related to racism, related to our economic system, etc., etc. But that woke me up, and then I heard that a few colleagues, this is sort of about 12 years ago, were thinking of starting an organization very much focused on the psychological aspects of climate change called the Climate Psychology Alliance. And Climate Psychology Alliance was launched officially about 10 years ago. We're into our 10th birthday. And we look at many, many psychological aspects of climate change. We look at kinds of leadership that's needed. We look at reasons for denial and disavowal. Increasingly, in recent years, we've been talking and publishing quite a lot about eco-anxiety, and also contributing to other organizations who are doing this. So, for example, in the UK, the Royal College of Psychiatrists has some excellent briefings, advice papers for both young people and for their parents and teachers about eco-anxiety. And the wonderful thing about it is that although this is a medical Royal College, it's actually a very, very systemic approach. It's a very it's not a pathology. They write about eco-anxiety as a very understandable reaction to climate change, and we've contributed a bit to that and to other areas. Another colleague of mine has been doing some excellent work for teachers on how to communicate about climate change to children, because in the UK, it's on the syllabus of children's education from about the age of 7. I don't know about other countries, but it's very, very children become aware of climate change very early because of what they're taught in school, and there are ways we can teach about it helpfully and not. So if you do go to our website, and thank you, Keisha, for the plug, the two things that are really I would recommend first of all for a visitor are the podcasts. There are about 16 podcasts and they're very engaging and relational. And also the handbook of climate psychology is a bit more theoretical, but gives some of our ideas. And thank you. And we also, if you go to that website, there's a page that says international that will actually take you to another small site, a much smaller site called Climate Psychology International. So here's my plug. If you're in another country apart from the UK and you are part of a small group or a bigger group or a group that hasn't started, but you'd like a visible presence on our international website because you're interested in climate psychology, let me know. We've just added Russia. There's groups in Russia and Slovakia and Germany and Sweden and the US and Australia, because it's really important that as psychological professionals we support each other and we work together. So let me come back to this concept of eco-anxiety, which is what you've asked me to speak about. It is, of course, it's a sort of summary to cover an awful lot. Some people argue that we shouldn't call it eco-anxiety because that's too pathologizing. I'm quite happy with it because the term, we get anxious when we're under threat, and if this isn't a threat we're facing, I don't know what is. But it's also really important that as soon as we say eco-anxiety, actually we mean a whole panoply of emotions. We mean grief, and I want to come back to grief in a bit more detail. Anger, apathy, rage, and anxiety. And for some people, that anxiety turns into a kind of what Lies van Susteren, a psychiatrist in the US, has called a kind of PTSD, a sort of PTSD for the future rather than PTSD, a pre-traumatic PTSD, she calls it. And what's important is that it is very understandable and normal and to be expected. And indeed, one begins to wonder about people who aren't feeling some kind of anxiety about what's going on. And that's really important. I'd like to come back to eco-grief. And that can be about grief at loss of future or grief at loss of species. What I'm finding particularly, and this resonates with colleagues when I speak about eco-grief, is that it isn't the kind of grief that resolves easily. We're often used to reading about the stages of grief if we have a single loss, if a grandparent dies, or a friend. And of course, the feelings are much more mixed up with a single loss than the textbooks might have us understand. The stages of grief that were so clearly described aren't stages at all. They're kind of, we spiral in and out of disbelief and anger and grief and sadness, and then into acceptance, and then it comes back to bite us. But the thing about grief connected with climate change is that it goes on and on. We don't resolve that grief. And there are other people who have written about this, about how the grief about climate change is unresolvable. And it is more like And this is a very pale illustration, but I've come to think about it more like the kind of situation where you have a very bad genetic cancer in your family. And so you know that your grandmother has died of breast cancer, and then your auntie gets it, and then maybe your mum gets it as well, and then maybe your sister is diagnosed with some kind of cancer, and then you're living with the worry that you may have. So, but you know, families who have that kind of situation, they still have birthday parties, and they still go on living, and they go on holidays, and they have jobs, and they're not actually necessarily in denial, but they're still grieving. They're inhabiting grief. And I don't know if that makes any kind of sense. And I say it's a sort of pale analogy for the kind of grief that we go through facing climate change. But I think I want to just name that that kind of severity in ongoing. So we have to learn to live with that grief. And I want to now, because it'll help me focus, and I'm kind of feeling quite overwhelmed today with everything that's going on. So I am going to refer to some slides if I can, because it will help me focus. So just to say that so I'm going to be talking a little bit today from insights from working with colleagues in Climate Psychology Alliance. I am going to refer to Joanna Macy and Chris Johnson's work, the work that reconnects, and the book called Active Hope, which you may have come across. I'm also going to mention some work from an organization called Deep Adaptation, which some of you may have come across. And although Deep Adaptation is a different kind of organization than Climate Psychology Alliance, we do have some links and work together, and some of my personal insights. So I'm very grateful for those people who have helped my thinking. So I think I want to think about how facing these the news, I think we need to shapeshift somewhat, and we need to shapeshift into our human nature more deeply. We need to have a deeper knowing about who we are, including that we are animal, including very much that we have bodies that move. So I'm really delighted, Keisha, that that you're involved in choreography and dance, because I think we need to get into our bodies more. And that includes dancing. That includes whether it's dancing our grief, or dancing our joy, or dancing our hope, or simply dancing for fun, but actually being very much dance as a way of being in our bodies. And of course, there are other ways of being in our bodies: walking in nature, sitting in meditation, connection, embrace, that we are not separate. I think we have to, and this is something I'd invite you all to do, facing the news. It's so easy to get into the grip of a kind of heroic mindset. And so easy, it's all too easy to burn out, and that's what happens to the hero. It is an emergency, as so many people have been saying today, so many people have been saying for a long time, but it's a long emergency. And so I would invite you to find, each of you, to find your unique purpose in this world in which the lens of climate change is absolutely preeminent and live that sustainably. I've said this before, but just a reminder to allow every emotion. We're feeling these emotions because we care. We care about what is happening to the natural world. We care about what's happening to the animals in Greece and the trees in Greece, the forests near Athens that were acting as the lungs, which are now burning up, so that people in Athens are now saying, is Athens going to be uninhabitable in the summer? But what's really important is not to get stuck in one emotion. A friend of mine talks about there being many seats on the bus. There are different emotions that we need to sit with. Don't just stay in one seat on the bus, but don't get off the bus altogether. And as I've said, don't forget to dance. I want to come back to Joanna Macy's work because I think it's very, very important. And some of you will know her work that reconnects, which Chris Johnson has also taken on in Active Hope. And she starts people off in her workshops and her processes, and there are many people now who teach the work that reconnects processes. Joanna Macy is very old, and we're grateful she's still with us. Where we start with gratitude, what we're grateful for, what's brought us joy. And then we think about what the question might be, what breaks your heart? What's breaking your heart at the moment? What loss are you bearing? And then through that process, we can begin to see with new eyes the direction that we might need to go on an individual basis. And then there's the going forth. What am I going to do now about it? And this cycle of gratitude, grief, seeing with new eyes, and then going forth seems to be a very effective emotional methodology for many areas, but particularly Joanna Macy has applied it very much to the great change that needs to be seen in the world with climate change. And I think what's also important is I've just spoken here very much about our individual reactions. But I think it's very, very important that we think about climate change also as a systemic problem, as a psychosocial problem, as a problem, as I've said before, of injustice and racism. And so we need to be challenging the way that life is lived now. We need to go against the grain. We need to find energy in individual simplicity, but we need to be modeling that, and we need to be helping our communities live that. And I find personally that finding energy in simplicity gives me focus and space. And I'm saying that from an extremely cluttered study, I must say. But nonetheless, there are parts of my life that I'm making more simple. And so one of the strapline we have for Climate Psychology Alliance is facing difficult truths. And we face these both personally, professionally, and planetary. So we have to learn to work together in our professions. I'm imagining that a good proportion of you, because you've come through the link with Keisha, work in the dance and movement professions. And I hope that your professional bodies can take on board their responsibility in their trainings and in CPD and in the kind of statements they make to governments. Many of the psychological professions are coming together to speak to COP26, the psychologists, psychotherapists. So I'm going to just come out of this. I want to go on to another slide set. And let's just, no. I wanted to show you this slide because I think this is a kind of map for the way our feelings might progress. This was a map that was drawn by Paul Hoggart and Rosemary Randall. You might have heard of Rosemary Randall. She developed a methodology called Carbon Conversations. She's a psychotherapist, and she would hold seminars with people about their carbon footprint. And she brought her psychological insights, and she worked with somebody who talked about the facts of climate change, and it enabled people to reduce their carbon footprint from a state of psychological awareness. And this is some research with both climate activists and also scientists as well. But the climate activists would start with an epiphany, a wake up, and there will be many people today who will be waking up or reawakening. Or being reminded of the enormity of the climate change crisis. And then this is followed by us being immersed in the topic, not being able to get it out of our minds. But then, as I've said, with the hero's journey, we can break down, we can go into crisis, and we need to find a way of resolving that, and then reawakening our interest. So I invite you to hold on to this idea of this model, because when you get into trouble with being burnt out, this may help you recognize the state that you might be in. So I'm going to... So at an individual level, just a summary, and then perhaps we can take some questions because I'm looking at the time. Do make room for all the eco-emotions. I'm talking a lot to people about radical self-care. I'm not talking about expensive self-indulgence here, but I'm talking about absolutely knowing what your boundaries are. Absolutely getting enough sleep, enough exercise. This is really important, this next one. Connect with other people. Find a validating, listening community. Part of what you're doing right now, Keisha, is setting up connections between people. Set boundaries and help others too. And what I mean by this is be very clear about what you will and won't do. You know, even firemen, when they're fighting a fire, take breaks. Even those fighting the dreadful fires at the moment, they will be having breaks in order to be able to keep going. And it's really important that we learn to say no as well as yes. And know your superpower. What I mean by that is, what are you really good at? And what are other people really good at? Sometimes when we can be in groups where we're all trying to do everything, and we all get exhausted. And if we can respect what we're really good at and do it even better, and also respect that other people are doing something else, then I think we can develop cohesive communities that can be effective. even on this day of days, not only with the IPCC report, but the backdrop to this with the fires and the floods. Don't forget to play, to dance, to sing, to laugh. Don't work late on screens. Set some really clear rules for yourselves. And I'm going to come out now. Let me stop that. Okay. So I'm going to stop now, Keisha, or pause.
Thank you so much, Judith. It was absolutely wonderful listening to you. I would love to do that again, actually, perhaps in a slightly different way, perhaps in the way of an interview with you. And I'm thinking perhaps that could be a good idea to gather some questions from you folks. If there's anything else that comes into your mind in the next couple of weeks, you can shoot me. Why not? I'm just going to post my email here. You can shoot me an email and I'll ask Judith in the conversation and make that available to you.
I would love to do that.
Cool. If anyone is interested in more events, there is quite a few coming up of this sort this summer and autumn. There's going to be some workshops, audio walks, more on a mindfulness sort of side of things. So this kind of radical self-care, I guess. So I warmly invite you to join in if you're anywhere around. If not, there will be some resource available online as well, wherever you are in the world. I posted a website a couple of times on the chat. And if you need to contact me in any other way, let me know here via chat and I'll send you details.